I've always been the adventurous type, but I'd never gone camping alone. It was just any random weekend in September when I decided to try something new. The spot was Yellowstone, a well-known park, but I was heading to a more secluded area, a quiet campground, far from the main trails. I arrived in the late afternoon just as the sun was setting. The mountain air and the scent of the trees quickly surrounded me. When I set up my tent, the feeling of being in nature was stronger than anything, but there was something about the place that felt off, like there was more to the calm than met the eye. I spent the rest of the day exploring the area, but as nightfall approached and the shadows grew longer between the trees, I noticed something strange. A nearby campsite, not too far away, seemed completely abandoned. No campfire, no lights, no sounds. It was like the place was frozen in time, waiting for someone or something that never came back. Naturally, I couldn't help but be curious. I decided to check it out later, after a simple meal. When the sky finally darkened and night settled in, the sound of crickets was replaced by an eerie silence, until suddenly a noise broke the stillness, sending a chill down my spine, a rustling coming from the trees around me. It wasn't the wind. It was like something was moving. But that couldn't be. There was no one else around, right? The night was unusually cold, and the sound of dry leaves crunching seemed to come from everywhere. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but the noise was getting louder, closer. My eyes started frantically scanning the darkness for any sign of life, but all I saw were shadows dancing in the trees, shaped by the moonlight. I went back to my tent, trying to distract myself, but the silence didn't last long. This time, it was the sound of footsteps. Short, rhythmic steps, like someone was walking down the trail. My heart raced. I was alone. There was no one else around. Or at least, that's what I thought. The footsteps stopped suddenly, and the silence returned, even heavier than before. I decided to take a walk to figure out what was going on. With my flashlight in hand, I headed toward the deserted campsite, trying to convince myself it was just another group that hadn't made it back yet. But as I got closer, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. I began noticing more strange details as I neared the empty tent. The fabric was worn, and something seemed to have recently been moved inside. But what really sent a shiver down my spine was what I saw on the ground. A sleeping bag, crumpled and tossed aside like someone had left in a hurry. I didn't know what to do. I looked around, trying to spot anyone, any sign of life, but all I saw were the trees, dark and towering, like they were hiding something from me. I was about to walk away when, suddenly, I heard something. Footsteps, again. But this time, they were closer, heavier, like someone was walking directly toward me. The flashlight trembled in my hands, and I felt the cold cut through my skin. My instinct was to pull away quickly, but I couldn't stop staring at the empty campsite, like something was drawing me back. The trees around me seemed to move, swaying strangely, as if they were reacting to my presence. The footsteps, now clearer, came from somewhere ahead. But no one was there. All I could do was walk faster, the sound of my own footsteps muffled by the dense vegetation around me. Every noise seemed amplified, the pounding of my heart in my chest almost deafening. When I got back to my tent, the feeling of being watched was unbearable. My mind started racing, trying to find a logical explanation for all of this, but nothing made sense. I was alone, so who else could be here? Maybe an animal? But the footsteps sounded way too human. It was like something was following me from a distance, getting closer slowly, but steadily. I tried to convince myself it was just fear taking over, but I couldn't shake it. Something was wrong, and the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger the feeling of danger became. I sat down in the tent, trying to calm myself, but something told me to get out of there. I didn't know what it was, but the sense that something was lurking was consuming me. I decided I couldn't stay there. Something inside me screamed to leave, but the fear of finding something worse on the way paralyzed me. I tried to distract myself, thinking of normal things, but the feeling of being followed only grew stronger. I decided to leave the tent, grab my things, and get out of that place before things got worse. Just as I was about to take my first step, I heard the sound that made me freeze. Footsteps. Clear, distinct, like someone was right behind me. Panic set in. I quickly looked around, but I saw no one. Everything was still, as if the very air was waiting for something. I knew I wasn't alone anymore, but I couldn't see who was there. I walked to the spot where I had seen the sleeping bag and the empty tent, and with a lump in my throat, I began walking back to the trail. That's when I heard the sound of something dragging on the ground, soft but constant, like someone was moving something heavy. I looked behind me, and for a moment I swear I saw a shadow moving between the trees. Not a tree shadow or an animal's shadow, but a human-shaped figure, strange, that seemed to float more than walk. My body froze. I couldn't move a muscle, and for a few seconds, I stood there, stuck between absolute terror and the urge to run. But in a moment of courage, I finally turned and ran, not daring to look back. Every step felt like it was taking me farther from that cursed place, but the feeling of being chased never left. My mind was racing as I ran down the trail, trying to ignore the weight of fear with every breath. The sound of my footsteps echoed through the trees, but at the same time, I felt like the footsteps behind me were still there. It was an unsettling feeling, almost like they were synchronized with my movement. I tried to convince myself that it was just fear messing with my head, but something told me I wasn't alone on that trail. The trees blurred around me, and still, the sound of footsteps continued, now faster, closer. The silence of the forest seemed to have been swallowed up by a dense, suffocating pressure. Suddenly I saw something out of the corner of my eye. A dark shape, taller than a tree, with long, disturbing arms moving toward the trail. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an animal. It was something different. The creature stood still, but its presence was enough to stop my heart. I froze in place, not knowing whether to run or stay silent. It was watching me, or at least it seemed to be, without making a sound. Then, as if it had heard my thoughts, the figure took a step in my direction. Fear completely took over me, and without thinking, I finally decided to run as fast as I could, not looking back, not giving it another chance. I ran. I ran like never before in my life, my lungs burning and my heart pounding uncontrollably. The sound of my footsteps seemed to be swallowed by the forest, but I still felt that presence, something watching me, following me, faster, closer with every step. I didn't know what it was, and I didn't want to know. All I wanted was to get out of that damned forest. When I finally reached the car, nearly collapsing from exhaustion, I turned the key in the ignition and sped off without looking back. The road seemed long, endless, and only when the sounds of the trees and the animals faded, and the city started to appear, did I finally breathe a little easier. I still can't make sense of what happened that day. When I got home, I searched the internet for reports of people who'd gone through something similar, but I never found anything. The campsite was empty, with no record of any other visitors, and the spot where I found the sleeping bag and the tent seemed to have been forgotten. For a long time I tried to convince myself that it was all just a nightmare, but something inside me knows what I experienced that night was real. To this day, I've never gone back to that place. Never again. And if you one day decide to camp alone out there, I just hope you have better luck than I did.
Please subscribe our YouTube channel.
I've always liked staying in more secluded places, away from the hustle and bustle of the city. In 2023, I decided to spend a weekend in a little house out in the California countryside that I found on Airbnb. The place was super remote, surrounded by trees and barely any light at night. I was there to unwind, away from everything, with no worries, until something strange happened. At first, it seemed like just another quiet night, but I quickly realized it wasn't exactly that. It was around 11 p.m., and I was in the living room, watching a movie and having some wine. The house was comfy, but the silence was almost suffocating if you really paid attention. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a faint knocking sound on the door. I figured it was probably some animal, or maybe the wind, since the door was old and creaky, but I decided to check the doorbell camera anyway. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man standing at the door, looking around like he was waiting for something. He didn't knock again, but he just stood there, staring in my direction. My heart started racing. I kept watching him for a few minutes, but he didn't move or even press the doorbell. I knew I shouldn't go to the door, but my curiosity got the better of me. I walked to the hallway and listened for any sounds from outside, but it was dead silent. The feeling that something was wrong was overwhelming, like the air was thick, and my gut told me not to open the door. So I figured it was better to stay away and wait until morning. But I couldn't help wondering who that guy was and what he wanted. I tried to relax, but the anxiety was eating at me. I knew the best thing was to go to bed and try to forget about it, but something inside me was telling me not to ignore what was going on. Around 3 a.m., I went to the window and looked outside, but saw nothing. The man had disappeared, and I felt a little better, but still uneasy. I decided that once the sun came up, I'd go outside and look for any clues, any explanation, but until then, I needed sleep. When I went to the door to lock it, I noticed something that made my blood freeze again. The door was slightly ajar. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, half open. I was sure I had locked it before going to bed, but now it was like someone had pushed it open carefully. Fear took over again, and I started feeling that creepy sensation like someone was watching me. There were no signs of a break-in, no broken glass or anything out of place, but when I looked closer, I noticed some things were definitely off. My suitcase had been moved, and some of my clothes were scattered on the floor, like someone had rummaged through my stuff. I didn't know what to think. The man from the night before didn't seem like an immediate threat, but now with the door open and my things messed with, everything was starting to take a more bizarre and unsettling turn. The silence in the house felt even more intense, and the feeling that I wasn't alone grew stronger. I tried to calm myself down and grabbed my phone to see if anyone in my family was available to talk, but the battery was almost dead. My instinct was telling me to get out of there as fast as possible, but at the same time, I didn't want to leave without understanding what was going on. That sense of panic started building up inside me. I knew I needed to do something, but what? There was no one around, and the house was completely isolated. The first thing I did was check all the windows and doors to make sure they were properly shut. Everything seemed fine, but something told me I wasn't seeing the full picture. So I decided to look through the footage from the doorbell camera to try to figure out what had happened. When I saw the video, something made me almost drop to my knees. The man was there again, now closer to the door, staring directly at the camera. But what really freaked me out was that he seemed to be smiling, with this strange, almost forced grin. He hadn't knocked, he hadn't said anything, he was just waiting. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. In the video, he stayed there for over 20 minutes, not moving, just staring out, and then, as if nothing had happened, he walked away. I couldn't make sense of it. He didn't seem threatening, but something about that scene felt off. I decided it would be better to wait until daylight to leave, but the restlessness wouldn't let me go. Before I went to bed, locking the door again, I felt a chill when I walked by the living room window. I can't explain why, but I had this gut feeling that someone was still watching. Maybe it was just paranoia, but the sensation was so intense that I almost thought I could hear someone else's breath. The fear felt like a weight on my chest. And when I finally did manage to sleep, my mind was full of unanswered questions. The next morning, the sunlight didn't bring the relief I'd hoped for. Instead, there was this lingering unease that wouldn't go away. I decided to pack up and leave the house, but before I did, I wanted to investigate further. Something told me I hadn't seen everything yet. I walked through all the rooms, checking every corner, every closet, every drawer. That's when, while opening the cabinet under the kitchen sink, I found something strange. A small piece of paper, folded and hidden behind some water bottles. When I opened it, what I saw made my blood run cold. It said, "I see you." No signature, no explanation, just that short, cryptic message like it was left there to haunt me even more. The feeling of being watched grew even stronger. No matter where I was in that house, I couldn't shake the sense that I wasn't alone. I ran out, grabbed my stuff, and headed straight for the car. Before leaving the property, I took one last look in the rearview mirror, and for a second I thought I saw a figure in the distance, watching the house. I couldn't make anything out clearly, but the fear I felt in that moment was indescribable. I wasn't sure if it was just my mind playing tricks, but that feeling of being watched stayed with me all the way back to the city. And to this day, I still can't explain what happened that night. I kept wondering, who was that guy? And what did he really want? To this day, I still don't know what happened that night. I tried reaching out to the owner of the house, but he didn't respond to my messages, and when he finally did answer, he said he'd never had anything like that happen before. He offered me a refund for the experience, but that didn't change what I went through. The idea that someone was there, watching and invading my privacy in such a subtle and calculated way, still haunts me. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I see that strange smile from the man on the camera, and I can feel the weight of his presence, like he's still around, watching my every move. The worst part is, after that day, I could never bring myself to go back to a secluded place like that. Even when I tried to rationalize it, the fear never fully went away. The feeling of being watched, of not being safe anywhere, still haunts me to this day. Maybe I'll never know what really happened that night or who that man was, but one thing's for sure. After going through that experience, my understanding of privacy and security was never the same. What happened in that house was real, and the feeling of being watched has never faded.
Please subscribe our YouTube channel.